"Dad, don't worry, I'm home." Those were the first words my son said to me in 22 years. Kneeling on my porch step, while a corporate helicopter idled behind him, and 4 sheriff's deputies stood in my kitchen holding papers meant to take my house away. But to understand why that moment broke me open, you have to go back to a November storm, a baby left on my doorstep, and a lie I lived inside for 2 decades without knowing it. I'm Walter Hayes. I've spent 66 years on Sycamore Mill Road in Clover Ridge, California, and most of my life fixing broken things: engines, fences, pipes. I learned early that broken things announce themselves if you're paying attention. What I never learned to listen for was a plan being built around me, quietly, by people I'd given my house key to. 22 years ago, a storm tore through Clover Ridge for 3 straight days before it broke. I was in the kitchen when I heard something over the wind, not the storm, not the stray cat I fed against my wife's wishes. I opened the front door and found a plastic laundry basket on the porch. Inside, wrapped in a soaked flannel blanket, was a baby boy, maybe 4 months old, crying with his fists balled against his chest. Tucked near his chin was a note: "Please take care of my son." No name, no explanation. I carried him inside. My wife, Evelyn, appeared in the doorway in her robe and looked at that baby like he was a threat that had walked into her house. "That child is not our responsibility," she said. "You bring a stranger's baby in here, you're opening a door you won't be able to close. Mark my words, Walter, that child is bad luck. He will destroy this family." Our 7-year-old son, Brandon, watched from the hallway with an expression that wasn't curiosity. It was something colder. I didn't argue with Evelyn. Some decisions don't ask for your opinion. They arrive already made. I found the box of Brandon's old baby things, wrapped that boy in a soft yellow blanket, and when I slid my finger into his palm, his fingers closed around it and wouldn't let go. That was the moment. Not the note, not the storm, just a baby refusing to release my hand. I named him Ethan 3 mornings later, standing at the window while the sky turned from black to gold. I noticed a thin silver bracelet on his wrist that first night, engraved with letters I couldn't read in the dim light. I told myself I'd look closer in the morning. It took 8 years before I understood what it meant. Adoption took 14 months of home visits and paperwork. Evelyn signed everything required and never told me why she'd changed her mind. I never asked. I worked extra jobs to keep us afloat, and I was never too tired to pick Ethan up when he cried. Brandon, 8 years older, treated him like furniture, not cruel, just indifferent. Ethan was different from the start. By 6, he'd taken apart my transistor radio and rebuilt it. By 8, his teacher pulled me aside in a school parking lot, breathless with something she needed to tell me. Ethan had been nominated for a gifted program requiring a full background file, including an inventory of any items he'd arrived with. I submitted the bracelet. 3 weeks later, a report came back. The engraving read WT, matching Whitmore Technologies, a private tech company in San Francisco. The bracelet had been custom-made for a child named Ethan, commissioned by a man named Daniel Whitmore 5 years earlier. Daniel and his wife, Claire, had died in a car accident on Highway 1 8 months before I found Ethan on my porch. Their infant son had vanished through the cracks of the county's emergency placement system. I stood at my kitchen counter holding that report, grease still on my hands, when I looked out the window and saw Evelyn in the yard, phone to her ear, saying quietly, "The boy is still here. His name is Ethan Hayes now. He has the bracelet." She'd known before the school ever submitted the form, and she'd already made a call. 6 years later, a black car pulled up to my house. Richard Whitmore stepped out, Daniel's father, with a lawyer and a photograph of his dead son. Ethan, 14 and shooting free throws in the driveway, froze at the sight of it. "Dad," he said, staring at the photo, "that man has my eyes." He was right. Richard told us Ethan was the sole heir to Whitmore Technologies. "He belongs with us," he said. I watched my son's face cycle through every emotion a 14-year-old shouldn't have to feel at once. Then he asked me the only question that mattered. "Does any of this change anything between you and me?" I told him no, not one single thing. 4 years later, when Ethan turned 18, the Whitmores returned with a formal offer: Stanford, fully funded, then leadership at the company. I sat with that folder for 3 weeks before I made the hardest decision of my life. I told him to go. I didn't raise you to stay inside the borders of what I could give you, I said. I'd rather be the reason you went than the reason you stayed. He cried at my kitchen window with his back to me. Then turned around and said one word, "Okay," the bravest thing I ever heard him say. Before he left, he pressed the silver bracelet into my hand. "Keep it for me," he said, "until I come back for it." For 3 weeks after he left, I walked to the mailbox every morning before coffee, barefoot on the cold concrete. Then the letters started coming, from a room above an Italian bakery on Valencia Street, about fog rolling off the bay, about missing the creak of our second porch step. "I keep the piece of paper in my shirt pocket," he wrote. "I don't know why that matters so much. It just does." Around the third letter, I noticed Brandon had started arriving early on Saturdays, offering to grab the mail on his way in. I told myself it was ordinary helpfulness. The letters kept arriving, or so I believed. Brandon kept bringing in envelopes, and I assumed Ethan's were somewhere in the pile. It was Evelyn who first mentioned, offhand at dinner, that the letters seemed to have stopped. "Young people get busy," she said. When I called the number Ethan left, it rang to a generic voicemail. When I called again, Brandon answered, "He's in a meeting. He forwarded his calls to me while traveling." I didn't know how he was, which was precisely the problem. Then I found an empty envelope in a kitchen drawer. San Francisco return address, already opened, letter missing. And later, a letter addressed as if from Ethan, but the handwriting was wrong. Rounder, careful, someone imitating him rather than being him. It said he'd found his place in the world, and it was best if we didn't dwell on the past. I told myself people's handwriting drifts. I folded it into a box with the others and tried to believe that. 4 years after he left, my neighbor Maggie watched something through her kitchen window that she wouldn't tell me about for a long time. Ethan had driven down from San Francisco, parked outside, sat in his car working up the courage to knock. Brandon opened the door before he reached the porch, arms crossed, and turned him away. Ethan had tried calling the house twice that morning. Both times Brandon answered and said I wasn't available. He'd tried finding Maggie's number, tried the church, hit dead ends Brandon had quietly closed before Ethan ever arrived. Ethan sat in his car outside my house for a long moment, close enough that I could have looked out my window and seen him. I didn't know. He drove away. Somewhere near Bakersfield, he pulled over and cried the way men cry when they think no one's watching. Then he drove on and didn't stop again. He built a company from nothing after that, burned through his savings, took a part-time IT job. Met a sharp attorney named Diane Colleton, who told him his pitch was the most poorly structured thing she'd heard all night, and sat down to fix it. Growth was slow, then steady. By the following year, Whitmore Innovation Group had 40 clients, and in every jacket he owned, folded in 4, was a piece of paper with our address on it. Just in case, I turned 66 that March. The house had gone quiet, Evelyn and I moved through our routines like two people who'd stopped colliding. Brandon visited every few weeks, always with some small reason, attentive in a way that on good days felt like care, and on bad days felt like being inventoried. I didn't examine that feeling too closely. Then Maggie left a business journal on my table. Page 7, a profile of Whitmore Innovation Group and a photograph of a young man in a dark jacket in front of the San Francisco skyline. Ethan Hayes, acting chairman, the same watchful eyes. I sat with that photo a long time, afraid to let myself believe it. When Brandon walked in, saw it, and something moved across his face too fast to name. "Old news," he said, and took the paper with him. That evening I heard him through the wall, low and fast. "Mom, we have a problem." What I learned later in pieces was this. Brandon had found my will in a drawer 6 weeks earlier and seen Ethan's name in it. He and Evelyn built a plan. First, a psychiatrist named Kenneth Marsh, whose license had expired 11 days before the date on the evaluation, he backdated and filed with the court. An evaluation diagnosing cognitive decline in a man who'd answered every question correctly. Second, a forged power of attorney. My signature practiced over and over in Evelyn's handwriting until it was close enough to pass a notary who processed 40 signatures a day without comparing them. Third, an attorney named Gerald Poole, who asked fewer questions than the situation deserved. Together they filed for a temporary conservatorship, full control of my finances, my property, my life, and the court, seeing only the paperwork in front of it, granted it. My bank account froze. My mail started going to Brandon's address. My phone calls were intercepted. A woman from my church told Pastor Linden she'd tried reaching me, and a man answered, said I was resting. I began to understand, slowly, the shape of the water rising around me. Then Maggie showed up one evening with a worn shoe box she'd been keeping for 10 years. For a decade, she confessed, she'd watched Evelyn throw envelopes with a San Francisco return address into the trash at the end of our driveway. She'd started rescuing them, telling herself she'd look if they turned out to matter. Inside the box, 23 letters, every one addressed to me, every one in Ethan's real handwriting. He had never stopped writing, not once. I read them until dawn. The last line of the first one broke me completely. I think about you every single day, Dad. The next morning, Brandon arrived early with Gerald Poole and 4 deputies. He laid the placement papers on my table, a care facility in Pasadena, everything arranged. Just sign it, Dad, he said. It'll be easier. I picked up the pen. I thought about the box of letters on my counter, about a piece of paper folded in 400 miles north. I set the pen down. No, he told me I didn't have a choice. I told him I understood exactly what a court order meant, and my answer was still no. And that's when we heard it, low, rhythmic, growing, closer than the day before. Until the window glass trembled, and the deputy at the door stepped outside, and turned back with his professional calm completely gone. Sir, there's a helicopter landing next door. What I didn't know yet was what had happened 40 miles away that same morning. Ethan had been sitting in a Whitmore Innovation Group boardroom reviewing the acquisition of a company called Meridian Capital, a firm that, it turned out, had built a quiet, profitable business filing conservatorship petitions with irregular documentation. His attorney, Diane, was reading through the active case list when she said a name that stopped him mid-signature. Walter Hayes, 14 Sycamore Mill Road, Clover Ridge, California. Enforcement action scheduled this morning. He stood, walked to the window, and pulled from his jacket a piece of paper worn soft from 4 years of handling. He laid it beside the file. 2 addresses, 1 piece of paper. Diane didn't wait to be told twice. She was already filing an emergency motion to stay the enforcement, citing fraud. Ethan canceled his calendar and called for the helicopter. He crossed my yard without a glance at Brandon or Gerald Poole, stopped at the porch steps, went down on one knee, and said the only words that mattered. Dad, don't worry. I'm home. I put my hand against a face I barely recognized and found, in the eyes, everything I'd been looking for. 22 years arrived in my chest all at once. Ethan didn't raise his voice once in the 2 hours that followed. Diane laid it all out on my porch railing, the psychiatrist's expired license, the forged signature that didn't match my bank records, the 23 letters as evidence of deliberate isolation. Gerald Poole read the documents, looked at Brandon, and quietly advised his own client to stand down and call the district attorney. The senior deputy gave a short nod, and the pressure in that kitchen released like a valve turning. The conservatorship was vacated within 4 days. Brandon and Evelyn were charged with elder financial abuse and forgery. Dr. Marsh surrendered his license. The notary was referred for review. Meridian Capital was acquired on terms Ethan wrote himself, forcing the withdrawal of every fraudulent petition it had helped file. 4 other families in the county got their lives back that same week. Ethan stayed through the following week, sleeping in his old bed with his feet hanging off the end, making coffee the way I'd taught him, 2 scoops, not 3. Pastor Linden came by and told him he'd been praying for this exact morning for 22 years. Maggie brought over tomato seeds in a plain envelope, saying the garden could use something to look forward to. That Saturday, we planted it together, Ethan with a new shovel, Maggie and I breaking up the soil by hand, Pastor Linden running the hose down the far row. Afterward, on the porch, I brought out the old wooden box and set it between us. Inside, the flannel blanket, the yellow blanket, the note that started everything. Ethan took the folded paper from his jacket, the one with our address on it, worn soft from 10,000 times being unfolded in hotel rooms and rest stops, and laid it inside. Next to the note, a stranger had once pressed into a basket in the rain. 2 requests made across time, both finally answered. I always knew you'd come back, I told him. How? He asked. Because I never put the box away. He drove back to Lowe's Angels a few weeks later and called that night to tell me he'd made it home safe, a habit, I realized, he'd never actually let go of. Even during the 4 years, I thought I'd lost him. That evening I stood in my kitchen and looked at the box on the table, the new shovel leaning against the wall with its price sticker still on, and the dark window over the garden we'd just planted. Evelyn had told me once that bringing that baby inside would change everything. She just never understood what kind of change it would be. I don't lock my bedroom door anymore. The house settles around me at night the way it always has, the pipes, the rafters, that same porch step that's creaked for 15 years. And out past the fence line, the garden waits, patient and dark, full of everything we put into it. If there's one thing I want you to carry from this, it's simple. The people who stay, who keep the box, who tend the rows, who walk to the mailbox before the coffee's even made. They're put in your path for reasons you won't understand until the morning you need them most. I trusted the wrong people for too long and let silence speak for me. If someone in your life has gone quiet, don't wait 22 years to ask why. Don't be like me.